Hi, I'm Dan Goldenberg, the Executive Director of the Call of Duty Endowment. In honor of Veterans Day, Remembrance Day, and the launch of Call of Duty Vanguard, it's my pleasure to bring you a conversation in partnership with Sledgehammer Games between two Army combat vets. One of them Canadian, one of them an American. Their experiences span 70 years, but they are both exceptional individuals who've been there in the mud and gone on to live exceptional lives today. And while they may be more than 70 years apart in age, I think what you'll find in their conversation is what they share is truly timeless. So sit back, relax, and listen.
I'm Ryan. I am a senior concept artist at Sledgehammer Games, and I was a veteran of the United States Army.
I'm Joe Siegel. I live in Vancouver. It's a beautiful city. I'm looking at the ocean and the mountains. Thank God I'm here.
I know that we had kind of briefly talked a little bit, Joe, about some of your experiences in Holland during World War II, and I wrote down a few things that I kind of wanted to talk to you about today. You know, just questions. You know, my grandfather was a Korean War vet and a paratrooper in the 11th Airborne, and so there's a lot of heritage in my family too. I can trace my military heritage back to the Civil War. So it's always a great thing to get to talk to folks like you who really lived through the grit of what basically we learned as soldiers nowadays, or because of all the experiences that you guys had. And you know, I know you had talked about Holland and stuff, but I also kind of wanted to know a little bit about, like, what was your basic training experience like prior to going to the war? Was it very abrupt and fast because of the time scale that, you know, they wanted to get you into the ETO, or was it still a normal process to go through?
It wasn't a normal process. It was 4 months of basic training from the time you joined the Army, and then you wound up with a bivouac, and then on the hold of a ship on your way to Europe.
Man, that was quick then. No real downtime. I know
no downtime.
Yeah, I know guys I know guys that when I deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, both during the current global war on terror. And most of us got time to go home in between training and prepping to go on deployment. You know, we had orders for units, and we got to go home and say goodbye and spend a couple of weeks with the family and you know, kind of set your mental picture straight. But from what I understand, it looks like you guys, when you left home to get on the bus to go to basic training, that was your goodbye.
The reason I joined the services, I was working on the Alaska Highway for the U.S. Engineers Department.
Mm-hmm.
When the war was on. They were building a highway from Canada to Alaska. Anyway, I was well paid. I was a kid. I was 14 when my father died, and I went to work shortly thereafter. And I worked on the Alaska Highway. I was paid over $100 a week in 1943. And I saved $3,000, and I thought I had a girlfriend in Calgary. And so I was going to go and visit the girlfriend. But I got off the train. You didn't fly in those days. I got off the train. A taxi driver picked me up because the taxi office was across from the station. And he said to me, "Where are you coming from?" And I said, "From the bush." "Oh," he said, "what do you do up there?" I said, "Well, we play a little poker." So he said, "Are you good at it?" I said, I think so. I didn't know much about poker. Well, he said, "Would you like a game?" I said, "Sure." So we went across the street to the back of the taxi office, and we started playing poker. There were another couple of guys there. And the night went, and the morning came, and we went to my hotel room. I had a reserved hotel room. And we started playing poker again. When we were finished, my $3,000 was gone. So I phoned my mother, and she was a widow. And I said to her, I'm in Calgary and I need money to pay my hotel and go back to work. She said, you made the bed, you sleep in it.
Sounds familiar.
So I had nothing else to do except join the war. So I went down, I tried to join the Navy, and they said, yeah, that's okay. We'll give you an application, but it'll take about 30 days before we can let you know. I said, I haven't got 30 days. Well, he said, go down and join the Army, Miyawada Barracks. I said, okay. So I went down, I arrived at Miyawada Barracks, and I said to the guy, how long will it take to get in? He said, Buster, you're in. 4 months later, hold of a ship in a hammock. Then we landed in England, Aldershot, about a week. And then we went over as a reinforcement to Belgium, then to Holland. And this was a reinforcement for the Calgary Highlanders, which was an infantry battalion and part of a brigade. And that was it. After that, you became a number, but then, you became a lance corporal. When the lance corporal got killed, you became the lance corporal.
Yes,
if
sir.
you had seniority. Then after that, the corporal, and so on and so forth. I wound up as a sergeant, but I learned a lot. I learned that life, you have a dependency. You have this in civilian life, and you have it in the Army. If you're in the infantry, you depend on the guy next to you, or you depend on the battalion on your right or on your left. And if the left flank isn't covered and you go in, you're a target. So I went through some of this anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about, battlefield tactics a little bit and the way it was kind of laid out. A lot of us younger guys who have been in the recent conflicts have kind of looked back on the way war was fought. And I gotta tell you, man, sometimes I talk to these Korean War vets and stuff, and you guys fought against tanks. You guys fought against Tigers. You guys fought against Panzer tanks and well-trained German infantry. I mean, like, these guys were not necessarily like, running around with 2 magazines of ammo and, entire sandals. These guys were trained for years, and a lot of them very experienced soldiers that you faced on the battlefield. I've spoken a couple of times in my life with some other American World War II vets, and it seemed like on the battlefield, the respect between infantry soldiers was sometimes there and sometimes not. Whereas, like, we didn't really have that experience in our current, situation, because it was a lot of guerrilla warfare back and forth between smaller units at each other. We were never in a major open conflict like you guys were. So it's interesting to hear when you talk about the battalion on your left and right, because I never spent time on a base that had more than 35 guys. We were on these little LPOPs out in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan, up in the mountains, and it was like, you're on your own, buddy. Like, you ain't got water, you ain't got groceries, and helicopters are grounded. You're out of luck. So, a totally different type of style of fighting.
So it's a question of which is the easiest and which is the best.
Yeah. Which circle of hell did you want to go to?
But I can remember a little town called, I think it was Hudi in northwestern Germany. And we moved in. We had the Calgary Islanders had the Regiment de Maisonneuve as a part of the brigade, and the Black Watch on the other side. And we came to this little town. This is 3 days before the war finished. We came to this little town, and we're at the end of a farm with a farmhouse at the other end and a big furrowed field. And in the center of the field is a straw stack. That's natural. And so The Black Watch went on one side, the Regiment de Maisonneuve went on the other side. The cavalry Highlanders moved up through the middle. 9 platoon, 7 platoon, 8 platoon. And we got caught in a crossfire. In the middle of the Strauss Act was an 88.
Oh no.
We're going to the farmhouse at the end, and it's occupied by the Germans. And there's a barbed wire fence in front of it. And we're supposed to take the farmhouse. Well, we tried. I went under a barbed wire and my helmet got caught. And you're wearing a steel helmet, you get caught in a barbed wire, you have trouble getting out.
Yeah.
But I got out. And we lost a lot of guys in that little battle 3 days before the war finished.
Oh yeah. I know that.
So that's when you feel bad because there was no reason
Yeah.
for the war to continue. It was over virtually.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so from that point on, I spent a year in Germany with the occupation army because the army gave me a choice.
Mm-hmm.
You go home, you get 30 days at home, then you join the 6th Division, which wasn't in existence. But you join the 6th Division, which was the Pacific War,
Mm-hmm.
and you go and you fight in the Pacific. Or you can stay in Germany, but you'll be there with the occupation army for a year, which I was. Then I came home in 1945 without a dime. Nothing, a little bit of gratuity money that I saved up because of overseas service. And then I started out in my life, and here I am. I have no complaints. I'm 96 years old, and the only thing I feel bad about is what is happening in the world.
Yeah.
The world hasn't changed. But where are we going now? We have to have an opportunity for everybody in the world. Everybody's entitled to a decent living,
Mm-hmm.
to an opportunity. Not everybody will take it,
Yeah.
but we have to provide it.
I felt like my first trip to Afghanistan versus my last trip to Afghanistan were vastly different. I felt that there was a much more of a chance for them to survive the war and go the direction they wanted to go than I did when I was in Iraq. Iraq was a mess. It was a mess from the start. It was a mess to the end. There was a lot of tribes that were fighting within themselves to reestablish power. So the Afghanis seemed to want it, though, very, very much. And honestly, they were some of the kindest, most honorable people I ever met in my life. They were incredibly family driven and incredibly loyal to each other. As long as that, you were doing the right thing, they stood by you. I fought with them against the Taliban, and they stood their ground with us, and I was honored to fight with them. So I think that's a good thing that comes from it,
So
at
we
least.
can say that Afghanistan stands a chance. There was a purpose in Afghanistan.
Sometimes we don't ever understand the meaning of why we're getting on a big boat to go somewhere, but we're going to be on that boat one way or another if you're wearing a uniform.
That's correct. You're going to do what you're told to do. Do you ever have that feeling that you're doing something you're told to do, even though you didn't want to do it?
Oh, there were times where we did missions that we felt were either risky for no reason or maybe putting undue stress on people, to try and get intelligence. But we had to be very careful because, people, we came into a town and talked to the village and tried to provide some security and whatnot for them. And then as soon as we were, out of the area, the Taliban came in and punished them for it. Yes. So it was very hard to get people to trust and open up and to stand up for themselves. But once they did, that's where I saw a lot of good positive things. I mean, when you were in Europe, where there was a lot of resistance fighters, I take it, from Holland, and did you see Germans that were part of a German resistance at all while you were in, who were assisting? Or
no, I saw a resistance on the part of the people in Holland.
Mm-hmm.
What do they call them? The House of Orange. They all wore an orange band to indicate that they were freedom fighters. But when you came into town in Holland, all of the civilians came out as if you were their liberator, and they all hit the streets. And then the Germans knew exactly where to shell, and they took their 105 with them, and they shelled and shrapnel and whatever. And we head for the basement. You go underground when you're being shelled. So we went for the basement. The shrapnel was around us. And I tried to cover a window with a mattress, and I got it done. But in the meantime, if you tried to go upstairs, the stairs, and the basement wasn't 8 foot. And this guy's basement was maybe a 5 foot basement. And this friend of mine, Brown, went up on the stairs, and he's halfway up the stairs, and he got shrapnel through the head. And that was it. They buried him in the town square. But the point I'm making, we did this documentary, and I mentioned the town Duttenham and the shelling that we went through. And whether you'd believe it or not, I got an email. First of all, I got a call from the Dutch consul. And then I got an email from a woman whose mother was in that basement. And this woman had read her mother's diary, and there were names. And it's an amazing thing. Here, 75 years later, her mother is dead now. But she, the daughter, sent me an email telling me that this occasion was in her mother's diary. Anyway,
It's incredible.
so here I am. I'm an old man. I'm happy. I'm healthy. I've been through the mill. I've had every goddamn disease that you can think of, but I've overcome them because that's the attitude. You need a positive attitude. If you're a veteran and you got nowhere to turn and no one to talk to, you have to have the power of positive thinking.
Yeah, you better
You're going
believe
to
it.
withdraw, and you're going to start to believe everything that goes through your mind. And then you're going to give up. I don't give up. I'm happy.
Yeah.
And I'm only 96. I got another 10 years.
What was it like, the attitude of like the country, the people, like when you came home from the service and reassimilated into, your back home, into your life? Like, how did people accept you? Because there is somewhat of a stigmata around veterans today that we're all kind of Looney Tunes. But I find that like the more accepting people are of veterans, to give them the opportunity, is that one little bit, right? Like in the military, it's then the sense of never giving up, never losing hope, never leaving someone behind, no matter what. No matter if they were the guy who picked on you every day in the platoon or not, he was still your brother and you never left him behind. So I always wanted to know, like, what was it like coming home to the people? Like, did they understand you? Did they try to understand you?
I never had much exposure to anybody. When I came home, it was June 1945. I had a relative here in Vancouver, and my mother was out here visiting, and I came to visit her. And this cousin of mine took me to the dock. There was a ferry coming in with a friend of hers on that ferry. And off that ferry came a young girl, and I said, "That's the girl I'm going to marry." I gotta tell you, her mother and her father didn't want me. They wanted a doctor or a lawyer or somebody with a profession that could make a living.
Mhm.
And I said, that's the girl I'm going to marry. And I did marry her 72 years ago. And we're still,
So amazing. It's amazing.
but I didn't have much support when I came out of the Army. And I got to tell you, I made a reference earlier to the mental attitude. And I wanted one thing in life. I wanted to be successful. That's all I wanted. The ability to succeed in my life. And so I started with nothing, and one thing led to another. As a matter of fact, I was in the war surplus business at one time, and I used to buy Corvettes and minesweepers, Bangor minesweepers, and you name it, blasting caps. That's how I got my start in the war surplus business. And then I said, well, a man came in, if you want the story, I'll give it to you. A man came into one of my war surplus outlets. At this time, I had 3 or 4 outlets. And he said, would you lend me $20,000? And I said, what for? And he said, well, I just bought 20,000 dresses and blouses and skirts, women's, from Simpson Sears. And I paid $1 each. Because in the catalog business, you can't put the same stuff back into the catalog that you had this year. You got to use different stuff for next year. So they sold off what was left over. That's how I started in the clothing business. I said to them, I won't lend you 20,000, I'll give you 22. But you give me the dresses and the skirts and whatever you bought. And that's how I started in the clothing business. I bought 22,000 pieces. I was in the Army surplus business and wire rope and God knows what. What the hell am I going to do with women's blouses, skirts, and whatever? $1 a piece. I thought I can't lose.
Yeah.
So I went out and I rented a 15-foot wide store. And I hired a couple of girls and I put that merchandise into the store. That's how I got started in the clothing business. That led to 105 stores. Then the 105 stores led to the acquisition of lots of other smaller companies and then a big national company. One thing led to another.
Yep.
So there was an opportunity, you took advantage of it.
Yeah, and that's that's what you're speaking about, having a positive attitude towards it. And do you feel like that sense of positivity though, even when you're looking up, at something that's daunting or, something that felt impossible to a lot of people, but you were willing to attempt it just because of the experiences that you had in your military time? I mean, like, I feel like I carry a lot of my experience from my service time into what I do in my job, how I treat people, always treat people with respect, always, do the job that you're paid to do, be the right place at the right time in the right uniform with a good attitude and ready to take, the day on and day to day, the military, the same thing could happen the next day, but you're going to come at it like a fresh day, like I'm sure you had some of those things that carried over from your time.
A lot of it. A lot of my life was molded by what I experienced in the military. My biggest handicap when I came out of the Army, my biggest handicap was my age. The guys that had the money are the guys that got the deals. I could only buy something that nobody else wanted, that I would have to engineer a use for, like a porthole exhaust fan that is direct current. I'd have to convert them to alternating current so I could sell them to a dry cleaner that had a steam press in a little store in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So what did I learn? I learned that where there's a will, there's a way. And when I said earlier, my biggest handicap was my age, because I would buy stuff. I would buy diamond drill bits for surplus.
Mhm.
I'd have to find who the hell is going to use a diamond drill bit. And so eventually I would wind up at the vendor of diamond drill bits. But the guy I was dealing with was maybe 3 times my age or twice my age. So it was a handicap. I always had the feeling that he'd look at me and say, what the hell does he know?
Yeah.
But I had a little respect as a veteran, because that's the one thing that you either get or you don't get. And if you get the respect, it gives you motivation. If you have motivation, you'll do things. And that's why I am where I am today. And I'm happy. And I've been through lots of things. I've had a stroke, I've had cancer, I've had this, I've had that, but I'm still here and I still work every day.
You know, I find it funny that you say that, because I feel like after you've experienced the time of being in service and working really long days, some of those days ran together, and if you went to war, it was one long day for a year or whatever amount of time you're gone.
That's right.
But I find that like now that I'm home, you know, in the civilian world, and like I have the opportunity to just get done with work at 6:37 in the afternoon and go home, and there's no fire guard for the night, there's no ammo or weapons checks or anything. I find that like, you know, I'm almost afraid to stop working. It's like you have this work ethic that you get in the military where, you know, you're just about the mission and how can I help the team and how can I help my family, and you know, you want to do things the right way and always want to be upfront with everything, and it's really hard to turn it off when you get home, you know. It's like you're ready to go.
But you do turn it off
Yeah.
a little bit. You don't turn it off, you change direction.
Yes.
That's what happens. You've either got it or you haven't got it. And if you've got it and you can't use it here, you use it there. And if you can't use it there, you find a place to use it, but you never let it go to waste.
Yeah.
If you have a talent, make sure that you use it.
Yep.
And you want to be independent. You're only 35, 36. You want to be independent. How do you become independent? How do you become independent? Let's go back to the veterans. How do we help them? How do you give a guy an opportunity to achieve whatever he's capable of achieving? And that's what you're trying to do with this organization that you have with the company.
I have to say my own experience coming home from my time in combat. I lost friends. I'm still losing friends today to suicide. I've lost more friends than combat. I mean, I've lost more friends to suicide now than I did to combat. But I will have to say that the Korean War and Vietnam vets have made a pretty substantial stand for us here in the States. And I'm seeing a lot more veteran ran networks rather than VA, you know, Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm seeing a lot of like veteran centers that are ran by veterans, that are, you know, managed by veterans, that are there to offer help. And that's where I got my help from, was from another veteran. And the power and the ability to support each other is probably something that I think that no one on the outside of the government can even understand as it is. And that's why I think it's super important for you guys to talk about this stuff with us. Excuse me. So that we can correct the faults, right? It's going to be it's always on the next generation of veterans to do better at getting, you know, some more support for the generations above. And as far as I'm concerned, the veterans from here in the States who went through prior conflicts have done a tremendous job of trying to get a support, and yet it's still not enough to really put a dent in veteran suicide, because of the psychological effects that we feel every day from what we saw and what we had to do. I just think that there's just really no words and there's no understanding unless you've been there. So that's why I see it as companies that reach out and provide support to veterans, like, building homes projects and renovating buildings for homeless veterans and helping job markets, getting them back on their feet. That's all great and well enough. But once we get them onto jobs, we have to help them be mentally stable enough to stay there. And then that's the part we're seeing that is majorly failing us, is being able to come home officially mentally.
Mental health is something that I understand and I support to a large degree in this community. But loneliness without having a place to turn or someone to talk to, that's what creates mental health problems. You got to be able to communicate. You got to have compassion. You got to have somebody to listen to you. You got to be able to express your feelings, express a problem, and feel that you have support. And that's the one thing that the veterans today, not all, but most, don't get.
Yeah.
That's why when you said earlier that the organizations in your veterans organization are run by veterans, that's because they're better. And the reason they're better is because the veteran understands. If he's been there, he understands. If you haven't been there, you can only imagine.
Yeah.
That's a fundamental difference.
It's, the Call of Duty endowment, it's like, the way I felt when I came into the company was that we had this small little faction inside the company that did whatever it could based on the power that we have as a major, player in a major company. And we have a lot of people and a lot of support here. Dan has really done a great job of trying to help people who are not part of our circle, that don't understand what we went through, and they don't understand that the extra added layer of difficulty coming back to the world has made it challenging for many of us to come back to. The focus that I've always felt from them is that they want to put stuff where it does the most good, right? And I've always said this, I've never really been a political person or anything, but it's people like us. It's the people on the ground, the community people are how we make it better for veterans. It's not big mom and pop in the government and necessarily that have to start this chain reaction to help people out. It's the communities getting together. Like, in Germany, they have these days where they come outside and everybody helps the old folks clean their yards up, and they have a big festival in the middle of town, and it's kind of like a town cleanup day, and they do these things, right? And nobody really tells them to do that. It's just kind of part of their tradition. And I think one of the things that we can do ultimately, and one of the things that that Dan tries to do is we try to push out these local abilities to help people so that we get the community of support channel bigger than it was before. The more people that you can touch, there are a lot of people out there that want to help and they don't know how to help. And so I think one of the biggest things that we can do is getting people who aren't normally involved with our community and understanding our community and getting them involved with something that it produces that they can see from it, right? So if we have veterans who are succeeding in the career field, who are succeeding in the job field, who are like you and I are right now talking about our experiences with the rest of the world, part of the reason why sometimes, and I feel it's kind of a shame, but part of the reason I feel that we continue to go down these roads of trouble is because we don't really address what really happened, right? Like, everybody in the world felt World War II. There's no doubt about that. But in today's culture, war is on the back burner on the news, unless it's like more than one country. So we've kind of become accustomed to the fact that at some point or another this year, someone's going to start a fight, right? So I think that it's more important for the community, the college kids, the high school kids, the people who work at local businesses, the churches, everybody comes together for things that are positive, that we help out groups of people in our communities that are hurting. And when you get all that energy in there, that positive energy you're talking about, that is what uplifts the people who are down at the bottom, fighting depression, fighting anxiety. It lifts you up and it gives you a sense that your community cares about you and they want you to be part of it. And as long as there's that hope, I think that veterans can do the rest. These are people who have a
The
will.
opportunity, they can do the rest.
Yeah.
But it's got to start at the dinner table. It's got to start at the dinner table with the family sitting around the table, and the message that the father and the mother convey to the kids. We're going to forget the Second World War in about 10 years. It'll be in the history books. But you're right when you say that it's the individual that can help the veteran, not the government. The government can provide sustenance. The individual can provide opportunity and inspiration. There's a difference between opportunity and inspiration and a feedback. Feedback, what do you call it?
Yeah. The trough.
Trough. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. It's been it becomes more apparent to me on the daily regular, the longer that I'm out, the more I realize that when you first get out of the military, those of you who survive the combat part of it, you're home, you're safe. A lot of guys do tend to get out at the end of a war. You see a mass exodus of people who are tired, who have been fighting for a long time. And I've seen a lot of my friends come home, and I have several friends who are extremely successful individuals who, I have a friend of mine who could build anything when we were in the military. He's an infantry guy, but he could build anything. And he's like machining, high-end equipment. And, he's really doing some things for himself. And he's been one of, he was a senior ranking person to me, but he was a really close buddy of mine. And he taught me a lot about resilience. You fall down, you get back up. Don't let anyone beat you down. Don't let the stakes stack against you. And I see that, and that he's successful. And then there are soldiers who are younger than me who didn't get that kind of leadership or didn't get that kind of support, and they're gone. They came home, they didn't fit in, they got into a bad situation. And, then eventually a few days later, we're hearing on social media that they're gone. And it's sad because some of them were, when you saw them, the way you remember them when they were in uniform with you was full of life. And even in the worst situations, they were your buddies and they were there for you. And hearing their loss to us is sad, because the more of us that go early is the more of the legacies that we leave behind to our children to teach about why we shouldn't do this anymore, and is gone. That experience from the planet of experiencing that bad turmoil is what tries to prevent it. I know personally, for me, after fighting, I'm more of an advocate for peace than I ever was before, because I don't want to see this happen to people.
But it will continue to happen.
It will.
But you see, you're 35.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen you're living in a different environment. 75 years ago, this computer I'm looking at right now to face you, it didn't exist.
Yeah.
But the whole world has changed. Now you either change with it or it leaves you behind.
That's true.
So you say, I don't want to be left behind. I got to keep up. Life is very simple. The only thing we have to learn is how the hell to live it.
Yeah.
What we have to do is assume responsibility for our own actions.
Exactly.
And build. And when you build in life, it is today, there's too much of a tendency. If you know the story of Little Red Riding Hood, and she lived in the house, and the wolf came along, and he huffed and he puffed and he blew the house down. Now that's a lesson. Because when you build a house, you build it on a solid foundation, and you build it so that nobody can huff and puff and blow it down. So whatever the hell you do, you got to do right. And you got to meaningfully recognize what your long-term objective is. You don't want to build on sand.
Exactly. You can't build on sand. Nope. Yeah, and it's kind of it's odd when we look, because when we first talked, you had mentioned that the Canadian Department of Veterans Affairs is very, very far behind in handling your soldiers that are coming home now. I did happen to serve with Canadians in Afghanistan in the Horn of Panjwai. We were underneath Canadian command, and we got close with some of their soldiers, and they're no different than us. They're just Americans in a different colored camouflage, and we're Canadians in a different colored camouflage to them. We were buddies on the battlefield all day long, but it's kind of sad for me to feel like I got more help coming home than they did, considering we went through the same exact thing. And considering that our countries are neighboring to each other and next doors, you'd think that we would share a little more information on how to help and treat our people when we come home. We spend $1 trillion sending them to destroy something, but we don't spend the money when they come home to fix them.
You're not going to change the government. You can change the environment. You can do something to give an individual what they need.
I really appreciate getting the chance to talk with you today, Joe. It's been really, really awesome. And, I really do hope we get to talk with you at some time again. It's just been really cool to hear your experience of World War II and how you came home and became successful. And, it also gives me, as a veteran who has come home and somewhat successfully reassimilated, it gives me more hope that we still have a good road ahead of us, and that there's still more people and there's more things that we can help, take care of.
It is my privilege to be able to relate to what you're trying to do, and I do relate to it.
My generation, the group of vets that are still fighting this battle fresh. I mean, if there was one thing you could tell these guys today to really focus on, to help them out, what do you think the most important thing would be for us to remember?
Look ahead, not back.